We're set to talk basketball, the start of spring sports, and we're going to have a sit down with Cincinnati Reds Hall of Fame broadcaster Marty Brennaman. All that and more as the February edition of Eye on the Storm comes up next. And we welcome you to the February edition of Eye on the Storm. I'm the Sports Information Director here at the University of Rio Grande, Randy Payton. Happy to have you along for another edition of our program. As we said in the open, we're going to talk basketball. We're also going to talk the spring sports here at the University of Rio Grande getting underway. But our big thing here on our February edition, a couple of weeks ago, we had a chance to sit down and have a chat with Cincinnati Reds recently retired Hall of Fame voice of the Reds, Marty Brennaman. He was here to speak to the Gallia County Chamber of Commerce, and just a thrill to have the opportunity to, over at the Line Center, sit down and spend a few minutes with the Hall of Famer and talk about a number of different subjects, and we'll let you listen in as well. Special edition of Eye on the Storm. I'm Randy Payton, joined by former Cincinnati Reds broadcaster and Major League Baseball Hall of Famer Marty Brennaman. You wrapped up your career last year. I guess question number one, how's retirement going thus far? Or has it set in yet since the season hadn't started?
I tell people all the time, they ask me all the time, Randy, about retirement, and I said, well, right now it's just like an off season. The retirement part of it will set in next month when they start playing out in Arizona. I'm not broadcasting the games, but you know what, I'm good with it. I 46 years, a long time, and I've told my wife Amanda, who's with me, has gotten tired of hearing me say it, but when Joe retired, he was physically unable to do a lot of the things he wanted to do, and I made up my mind then that was not going to happen to me, and knock on wood, I'm healthy, and I'm looking forward to doing a lot of the things I had not been able to do since I began that Reds job back in 1974.
46 years in the booth. You saw all kinds of great teams, great players, big moments. Given the fact that your career started with Welcome to Al Michaels Field,
correct.
It turned out far more great than you thought it might be, I guess.
It did. I don't know how much. I don't really recollect ever wondering to myself when I got the job and went to work in '74, sitting down and consciously thinking about how long I was going to do it or how long I was going to be in Cincinnati. I don't believe that I ever dreamed that 46 years later I'd be retiring from the same job that I started back in 1974, because this job is, and I'm speaking generally now, is such a transient job. Guys are constantly moving, thinking bigger market, more money, more notoriety. And every time I had a chance to leave, I always said no. I'm happy where I am, and so if you do that enough, and a job comes open, and somebody will say, well, let's call Brennaman in Cincinnati, and they say, don't bother to call him. He's not going anywhere, and that's fine. I never had a problem with that. Never look back today on all the opportunities that I had to leave, and I could have gone to Boston, New York, Chicago, San Francisco, and there's never one that I thought, boy, if I got to have a do-over, I'd have taken that job. And so now I'm one of 7 or 8 guys that broadcast big league baseball 40-plus years, and they did it for only one team. And I'm awful proud of that. I mean, that means as much to me as about anything that I've ever accomplished in all the years I've been doing big league ball.
31 years working with Joe Nuxhall, and you put me to bed a lot of nights listening to you guys talk about what it was like to work with him.
Well, it was special. As the time went by, we got closer and closer and closer. And in fact, years later, a guy named Greg Horde, who was a writer, Cincinnati sports writer, and then became an author, wrote books, wrote a book on Joe and wrote a good one. And there's a chapter in there that refers to Joe and me like an old married couple. And in a lot of ways, that's the way it was. I mean, that's how close we were.
It made it good.
It did. I mean, we knew each other so well that I could stop a sentence in the middle of it and he could finish, and vice versa. And he is such is today such an iconic figure in Cincinnati and in Hamilton County. I've said it before, people talk about Pete Rose and talk about Oscar Robertson, who, even though he was from Indianapolis, made his mark in Cincinnati at UC. There's no greater figure, or more loved figure in the history of sports, maybe in the history of mankind, as far as the city of Cincinnati is concerned, than Joe was. All the years that he and I were together, and all those years since he's passed away, I've never heard one person ever utter any negative about him. He was great with fans. He was a lot of fun to work with, and those 31 years are just treasures for me.
I think you're in 5 Hall of Fames, with another one coming up, including obviously Cooperstown.
Yeah.
But 26th of April, you go into the Reds Hall of Fame. And what's your thoughts as we move closer and closer to that date?
Well, I'm awed by it all. I never thought it would happen. And I've never politicked for being in any Hall of Fame. As far as the one in Cooperstown, I've written 2 or 3 letters for guys to support their candidacy. And I said to myself then, if I had to get somebody to write a letter for me in order for me to have a chance of getting in, I'll never get in, because I won't do that. If my ability and my longevity and whatever else goes into the formula was not good enough, then I was never going to do that. But the last day of the season, when I went on the field after the game, somebody brought it up, and I made a comment. I said, I've never done this before. This is not me. I don't do this. But I said, I don't know of another human being that more deserves to be in the Reds Hall of Fame than me. And they had to change the bylaws because it's stupid. No longer, thank God, that you had to be a uniform person in order to get in. And I did some research about all the clubs in baseball that had halls of fame, and I think all but one allowed broadcasters, club officials. In fact, the Boston Red Sox put a guy in last year that worked at the customer service desk for 40 years. And so I'm thrilled to death that they thought enough of my career and the fact that it had all been done in the city and with the club that they changed the bylaws and allow me to go in. And it's going to be a big weekend for me, and certainly be a big weekend for my family.
What about the club in general? They made a handful of moves, big moves here in the off season. Have they done enough to make a championship run in your mind?
I think there's no question, although I think one thing that it all hinges on is the health of Eugenio Suarez, who suffered a shoulder injury that required surgery, and you fool around with elbows and shoulders, you can be as confident as the day is long, but at the same time, you have to be very lucky, and you have to hope that shoulder, now that the surgery's been completed, one, that he won't miss too much time at the beginning of the year, and 2, once he gets into the lineup, he's going to be good enough to pretty much play. But the moves they made, picking up Mike Moustakas and picking up the left-hander to round out their rotation of Wade Miley, and of course what they did just days ago in Nick Castellanos, they have caused not only teams in the Central Division but people in the National League a reason to turn around and say, look out, because here they come. And I believe that. I think when you add Miley to a solid 4 to begin with, and you only needed one more pitcher to round out that rotation, and you get a veteran like him and a left-hander to boot, which they did not have, to go with the people like Sonny Gray and Luis Castillo and Trevor Bauer and Anthony DeSclafani, that's a solid that's as good a rotation as there is in our division, and it can stack up very favorably with anybody else in the National League. So I like what they've done. It's unbelievable that Bob Castellini opened the purse strings, and then Dick Williams and Nick Kroll were able to go out and acquire the players that they've acquired. It's going to be a fun year, and if the rest of that bunch can stay healthy, there's no reason to think that this team won't be playing meaningful baseball games in September.
One last thing on baseball. What's your take on the Astros, Red Sox, the cheating scandal?
Terrible. And I think they're the only 2 teams involved. I think if there were other teams implicated in this whole thing, that it would have surfaced by now, if for no other reason than it was rumors that this team or that team also. You don't hear any of that. I think, and I'm not a big fan of Rob Manfred, the commissioner, but I think the penalties that he imposed upon the Astros, and we're still waiting to find out what they're going to be on the Red Sox, but he suspended the general manager and manager Jeff Luhnow and A.J. Hinch, and then they were ultimately fired by owner Jim Crane. $5 million fine, that's pocket change. But when you take your first and second draft choices away in back-to-back drafts, that's a killer. And they got a very good team, and I'm thrilled to death now that Dusty Baker will be managing that team. And as far as a long-range future concerned, you take your top 2 draft picks away from 1 year would be bad enough, but back-to-back years, that's big. In Boston's case, they fired Alex Cora. Alex Cora was at the forefront of what went on in Houston because he was a bench coach there. Then he got the Boston job, and he orchestrated it in Boston. I think he should be banned for life from baseball. And we'll find out what happens. But it's something that had, and I give a lot of credit to Mike Fiers. I know there were people that have been very critical of him because they feel like he talked out of school. If Mike Fiers, the pitcher, had not had the guts to go on the record and put his name to it and said, this is what went on, eventually this whole thing would have surfaced anyway. But the longer it went, the enormity of the lack of credibility as perceived by the fan would have been a very, very difficult thing to overcome. So I think the game will outlive this. And hopefully there won't be a lot of people that will look upon this as something that they can't recover from as far as being fans. But it was definitely a dark day in baseball.
I want to switch gears here just for a second. Obviously, you made your bones in baseball, but you had a pretty good career as a basketball announcer, too. Got to see some great teams and great players during that part of your career as well.
Well, I was fortunate to I did pro basketball in Virginia when before I came to Cincinnati, when they had Julius Erving and Charlie Scott and George Gervin. I was around great players, and Doc was the best of them all. And then I got a chance to do a lot of college basketball. I worked in the Big Ten and the ACC and the SEC, and then I had the opportunity of doing the NCAA tournament on radio. I think I did 15 or 16 regional Final Fours and did 11 Final Fours. And
you had maybe the best game ever.
I was just getting ready to bring that up. Every now and then, over the last 7 or 8 or 9 years during the course of a baseball season, I would figure out a way to get to the name of Christian Laettner because I knew it lit up the Kentucky fans so bad. And I would do it every year, and every year I would get the kind of response that I thought. I did the Kentucky-Duke game at the Spectrum in Philadelphia, and to me it was the best basketball game ever played. It had big shots. Sean Woods made a big shot late in the game, a bank shot in the lane with 35 people hanging on him. And then the decision that Patino made to not guard Grant Hill when he made the inbounds pass to Laettner at the top of the key. And to compound that, and he'll go to his grave saying that if I had to do it 1,000,000 times, I'd do it the same way. Then you made a bad decision. But he told the two players that were kind of double-teaming Laettner at the top of the key in Darren Feldhaus and John Pelfrey, do not foul him. And if you watch the replay, and he'll throw a perfect pass up here, and Laettner caught it, and as soon as he caught it, those two guys backed away from him. And all he had to do was turn and shoot. Now, he had to make the shot. It was a great basketball game, and I had a lot of other ones like that. I had an overtime game that Greg Anthony beat Arizona in a major upset at McNichols Arena in Denver to go to the Final Four. And I was fortunate. I tell people all the time, with all due respect to the World Series or the Super Bowl or whatever you want to talk about, there is nothing on earth like the NCAA basketball tournament. I was just privileged to be a part of it for a long time.
What's your advice for a young guy or gal that wants to get into the business of sports broadcasting?
Well, that's a good question, and people are shocked. I talk to young people all the time, young men, young women, and they will come up to me and say, I have an aspiration of doing what you do. Do you have any advice? And I said, they're college students. And I said, well, the first question I would ask you is if you're in love. and they're kind of taken aback by that question because they think that's got nothing to do with it, but yes, it does. Because I think the toughest thing to do in this business is to find a job. And once you find that job, if you have talent, then you will rise to the level of your talent. If you are encumbered by a new wife or a wife with children, or you're in love and you can't be separated, and if somebody offers you a job in Laramie, Wyoming, I can't go there because then that's 2 strikes against you. It's a job, it's a tremendous, for me, it's the only thing I've ever known. It's a great occupation. I think it keeps you young. It's fun. There's nothing like doing play-by-play, and I know that there are those who aspire to be the 6 and 11 o'clock sports guy. I'd have lost my mind had I been confined to a TV studio for 46 years. And so I would recommend it highly to people. I think like I said, once you get the first job, and if you have any ability, then you don't have to worry about things. People will find you, they will hear about your talent, and you can move. But I would recommend it highly to any young man or young woman that wants to get into this business.
2 last quick questions. They both revolve a little bit around food. Tomatoes. Mm-hmm. You and Joe talked about them quite a bit.
I grew them, he didn't.
Now that you're retired,
yeah,
are you going to grow some? Or are you going to be too busy traveling?
No, I think where we live, we don't get enough sunlight. Believe me, I thought about it, and I was proud of my tomato plants, and would have continued growing them. And all of a sudden, in the mid-'90s, I discovered the game of golf, and that kind of killed the tomato plants. And we used to talk about them, and Joe would talk about his golf game, and I'd make fun of his golf game, and all of a sudden, I got bitten by the bug, and so I'm a big fan of the game of golf.
All right, the last question, chicken. You and Tucker Barnhart, you cooked it over here when the caravan was here in Rio a couple of years ago.
I'm a big fan of chicken, man.
What's better, what you cooked that day or what they serve in the press box at Houston? Well,
Houston,
Brantley apparently eats like he's going to electric chair.
He does. He does. That's he and I get along so well together, and I've often said I'm not the most religious person in the world, but I think God gave me Jeff Brantley when he decided to take Joe, and we both have an affinity for fried chicken. We've traveled the continent looking for good fried chicken. We're a big fan of the roasted chicken that Bob Evans did was just off the charts. And the day that you and I crossed paths during the caravan, that they took us into the kitchen and put the apron on us and put the little cap on us. We just came across pictures the other day. I did, and we had a great time that day. And the chicken that chicken's sensational. I mean, it is really good. And I think I am a connoisseur and a very, very viable critic of fried chicken or any kind of chicken. And I endorse what they did.
Marty, pleasure having you here today. The honor certainly belongs
My pleasure,
to us.
Randy. Thank you, bud.
All
Thank
right,
you.
that's Marty Brennaman, the former voice of the Cincinnati Reds. I'm Randy Payton. We'll have more of Eye on the Storm after this. And we appreciate Marty spending time with us when he was here a couple of weeks ago to speak to the Gallia County Chamber of Commerce. What a thrill to get a chance to spend a few minutes with the Hall of Fame voice of the Cincinnati Reds. Randy Payton back with you live and joined now by Athletic Director Jeff Lanham as we take our look at what's going on the Rio Sports scene. And we start actually with women's basketball. River State's conference tournament starting tonight. Rio at home to take on Asbury. Coach Smalley's team has been up and down this season, and hopefully they'll be up tonight.
Well, and the whole scouting report on Asbury is they can flat shoot it. And they actually played Carlo here on Sunday afternoon in a makeup game. They kind of met here halfway, and they lit it up from a three-point line. So that's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a challenge for Coach Smalley and the crew tonight.
Been a pretty good year for Coach Smalley's crew, led by the lone senior on the team, and I think we've got a picture of her in Sydney Holden, who's a three-time conference player of the week. She was the national player of the week 1 week earlier this season. Just had a tremendous career. Got to be one of the front runners for the conference player of the year, which will be announced sometime next week. And how successful they are more often than not revolves around her.
It is, and she is such a just even-keeled player.
Yep.
I mean, she never gets frustrated one way or the other. Her expression never changes. And the fact that she has come back from a potentially more than a season-ending, a career-ending injury with her knee, and come back and has had a year like this. And you're right, she is definitely in running for River State's Player of the Year honors.
Men's basketball, unfortunately, did not qualify for the postseason. Their season ended with a tough loss to West Virginia Tech last Saturday. The men finished 12-18, and they had a couple of seniors who played their rear ends off this year. There's one of them in Hadeeth Tigges, the other Greg Wallace, and kind of a feel-good story on Saturday against West Virginia Tech. Greg's mother had never seen him play, and flew over here from England, surprised him, and oddly enough, he had one of the best games of his career.
Well, and that's good. It's good for both of the seniors to finish up that way, and you want to see that. You want to see that for guys that have spent that time and sweat in the gym, and to come away with those kind of games.
Those are two guys that we talked about afterwards that kind of grew up. Greg, in the fact that he didn't play in front of any family for 4 years while he was here, and Hadeeth Tigges, who I think maybe 2 or 3 weeks after signing here 2 years ago, he lost his dad in a drowning accident while on vacation. And those guys really had to grow up as not only as basketball players, but as young men.
Right, and that says a lot about them as a person, their character, and just as them as a young man. Absolutely.
So they, as we said, the men finished 12-18 and failed to qualify for the River States Conference tournament. We move our attention to baseball, and we talk about a rough start. Never has there been a rougher start in the history of Rio Grande baseball than this 2020 team. They're off to an 0-15 start, the worst start in program history. They play this weekend, weather permitting, down at Midway. And I think we all knew last year, based on the success they've had in previous years, they were a senior-laden team. I don't know that we thought, though, the drop-off was going to be this dramatic.
Well, and you think about what he lost. He lost catcher. He lost up the middle, and that's so important in those games.
Catcher who's playing professionally.
Catcher who's playing professionally, and center field, and shortstop, and second. And then we have injury to the second baseman, Sorrell, who is out for the season. And he does have one. Kendall is back as a pitcher, but still, he's got had a lot of question marks, and that has shown. That definitely has shown. Coach Brennaman has never said about he'll go play anybody anywhere, and he's hoping that they can all come together and make some noise in the conference, and that'll be our first conference games this weekend. It is going to be on Saturday, Sunday. They're going to play one game on Saturday and 2 games on Sunday.
Moving back one
in fact,
day.
you just confirmed that.
Yeah, I think we've got a couple of pictures from action. There's Caden Cluxton, one of the seniors who has played well. Hit the ball pretty well in the opening part of the season. And for Rio, it's really been the perfect storm in a bad way. They're not hitting the ball well. They're not pitching the ball well. And they're among the worst teams in the country in fielding right now.
Not fielding it well, yeah.
There's Juan Familia right there scoring a run in the one of the losses to Indiana Tech last week. But it's just been a combination of everything going wrong for him.
Well, he feels good about the idea of going into conference play, so that's what he's trying to looking at now, and it's all about the person that goes to the next level team-wise is who wins that conference tournament.
That's
so
exactly
first thing you got to make the tournament, then the idea of winning that tournament. So
another team that's had a lot of success in recent years has been Rio softball, and they too feeling the effects of losses of some pretty good seniors. They're off to a 2-8 start, which is the worst start since 2001, and it doesn't get any easier for them this weekend. They head to Columbus, Georgia to play in the NFCA Classic, and 3 of the 6 teams they're supposed to play down there are either ranked or receiving votes.
And talking with Coach Brennaman, he said, I'd love to be 2-8 right now, which is kind of funny about that. But and Chris is the same way. He goes down south and plays those teams that have never been inside before. They're outside 12 months out of the year, and that makes it tough for him. But again, he's throwing a lot of freshmen, sophomores out there that I have not seen this kind of play before. So
they're 2-8, and I think 4 or 5 of their losses have been by 1 run.
And
so they could just as easily be on the
he
opposite
says they
end
should
of
be 6-2. That should be their record right now. So, you know, they have the same thing. They kick it around a little bit and don't hit one game,
Right.
then they hit like crazy the next game. So they have inconsistencies too. So, and again, you got to develop that.
I think one of the players who had a pretty good weekend last week, we got a shot of her, is Shelby Schmidt, who had, I think, 2 or 3 games down there in Tennessee last weekend where she had 3 or more hits.
Right, and has done a good job. And again, they're just the consistency, and that's what happens with that. You just got to get consistent, and at some point you start seeing that ball. You know, we always talk about we had a gal who was a pretty good player, Miss Kreiner last year, who talked about that the ball looked like a watermelon coming at her. You know, and that's when you get into those kind of modes, that's when things are going to happen in a positive way.
We closed it out by talking about indoor track and field. Of course, they wrap up the indoor season. There's some folks that'll be headed to South Dakota to compete in the NAI National Championships before the attention turns to the outdoor season. But Rio at the recent River States Conference Indoor Championships had a couple of young people honored, and we take a look at them. That's Kayla Barr, a freshman out of Waverly, Ohio, who was named the Women's Field Athlete of the Year. Really good job in terms of weight throw and shot put. And then on the men's side, we've got Zach Collins, who won the same award on the men's side, the Field Athlete of the Year, and he's been near the top of a lot of categories when they have competed over the course of the weekends this year. And kudos, a feather in the hat to Bob Willie and his program.
Right, and you know, the indoor season almost for some of these athletes is like, I'm just getting warmed up for outdoor, because both of them, talking with both of them, they just said, hey, I just can't wait for the outdoor season to get here. But that's congratulations with them. What a nice job.
We hope the weather cooperates with them.
True for our conference tournament.
That's exactly right. The outdoor track meet, the outdoor Rio or River States Conference Championships, I should say, will be hosted here at Rio this year, and I know there's a lot of work going into that.
I think April 23rd, 24th.
I believe you are correct.
Thursday, Friday down at our facility.
So we'll have plenty to talk about in terms of that on future shows. And tell you what, we're also going to give you a little tease for one of our future shows, and the fact we got some new sports coming here.
We
at the
do,
University
we
of
do,
Rio.
Randy, and you know we've talked about these before. The esports coming in, and we're close to getting coaches for that sport. We've got men's wrestling that's coming for the fall. We've got men's and women's swimming that's coming for the fall. All of those are moving forward, and we're excited about those. Our whole numbers in our athletic program, we're looking at to increasing those. We want to hit that 500 number.
Well, we'll talk about that more on our March edition of Eye on the Storm. That wraps it up for February. We appreciate again Marty Brennaman. We appreciate you for tuning in. I'm Randy Payton for Jeff Lanham. We'll see you next time on Eye on the Storm.